Welcome to Cyber Bytes, your weekly dose in the latest in cybersecurity news. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan, and today we're unpacking headline-grabbing breaches, new supply chain security projects, and a sobering look at why more intel isn't always better for cyber defenses. So let's get started. Let's kick off with a story straight from the analog age. A massive physical data breach that's left thousands of Australians' personal information potentially exposed. Mercer Super and Virgin Money Super members became unexpected victims when thieves targeted Australia Post Melbourne's General Post Office, hitting GPO Box 380 Bourke Street several times between the 6th and the 17th of July. Here's the thing. It wasn't a cyber raid on a database, but the old-fashioned break-in at the post office box. The kind most of us thought went extinct along with dial-up internet. The stolen mail included letters loaded with personal and financial details. Mercer Super says it doesn't know the exact number of affected members. It all depends on who sent mail to that GPO box during those July dates. Both Mercer and Virgin Money Super have moved fast, and they've notified those possibly at risk and are rolling out fresh security measures. They're urging customers who posted mail to the Melbourne GPO during that period to closely watch their accounts for suspicious activity. Australia Post is now collaborating with authorities in the ongoing probe. For our next story, we're going to switch gears to the bleeding edge. Have you played with Google's new Gemini CLI for coding yet? It only just dropped in late July, hustling into the AI code assistant showdown. But within weeks, researchers at Tracebit discovered a critical vulnerability. It has a flaw that lets attackers silently hijack your dev environment with almost zero signs. Here's why it works. Gemini CLI reads context files like readme.md and Gemini.md to understand a codebase. But attackers figured out that by sneaking commands masked with visual trickery and white spaces into those files, they could prompt Gemini to execute hidden, malicious commands and do things like exfiltrate data right off your laptop. The thing is, the command looks normal at a glance, defeating easy detection. Other AI tools like OpenAI, Codex, and Anthropic Claude reportedly resisted the same style of attacks, and it is thanks to their stricter allow listings. But for Gemini users, Google pushed a fix in version 0.1.14 on the 25th of July. So if you're using Gemini CLI, you should have updated yesterday. And absolutely never run it against untrusted projects unless you're in a secure sandbox. This story shows us that as AI tools rapidly enter our coding workflows, attackers are already lining up prompt injections, context poisoning, and auto-execution exploits. This is a canary in the coal mine for secure by design AI dev tooling. Now, we'll take you to our next story, which is a classic supply chain horror story, but with a modern twist. TopTal, the global freelancer powerhouse, had its GitHub organization hijacked by as yet unknown threat actors. The attackers published 10 malicious packages to the NPM registry disguised as legitimate TopTal libraries, and they grabbed around 5,000 downloads before it got taken down. What did these packages do? Well, each of them embedded a nasty payload in its package.json file. It weaponized NPM's install script. On pre-install and post-install, the packages exfiltrated GitHub tokens to the hackers via a webhook. And then it would then silently wipe all directories and files on Windows and Linux machines. And it required no user interaction. All it takes is just one careless install and gone. Your files will vanish. If that's not bad enough, the criminals also flipped 73 TopTal repositories from private to public, possibly exposing proprietary code and sensitive information. The exact method of this breach isn't public. It could be stolen credentials, it could be an insider. Either way, the incident underscores a chilling reality. Even packages from trusted organizations can go bad quickly. Open source registries like NPM and PyPI remain ripe targets for this kind of attack, with 73% of modern apps relying on open source dependencies. Every compromised library is a ticking time bomb for thousands of downstream projects. Our next story is a much brighter news. It's about Google, who just launched OSS Rebuild, which is an ambitious initiative aimed at tackling open source supply chain risks at scale. Here's what it does. OSS Rebuild will automatically reproduce and cryptographically verify builds from popular Python, NPM, and Rust packages. Think of it as trust but rebuild and verify. If a published binary on PyPI or NPM doesn't match its open rebuildable source, the system raises a red flag and documents the results in a transparent, tamper-evident log. Why is this important? Because recent supply chain attacks often rely on publishing binaries that aren't reproducible from the source code. And by doing so, it can hide backdoors or malware in the compiled artifacts. Google's platform rebuilt this in secured sandboxes, compares semantics, and if everything matches, publishes the attestation. Security teams can then independently verify that the package hasn't been swapped, tampered with, or built from a poisoned codebase. For developers and enterprises, this augments your software bill of materials and makes vulnerability triage and incident response a lot faster. Best of all, it doesn't force upstream maintainers to change their workflow or the way registries operate. It simply layers on another crucial level of scrutiny, transparency, and accountability. And now we're on to our final story, which is a wake-up call for every SOC analyst blowing past alert fatigue. Sometimes more isn't merrier. A new Forrester survey by Google Cloud found that 61% of security teams are overwhelmed by the tidal wave of threat intelligence they now receive. Picture this. Teams are deluged with feeds that are insufficiently staffed, and 59% admits that they can't vet which threats actually matters. The consequence of all this is that most organizations default to being reactive, dealing with incidents as they come. In fact, 72% of surveyed companies acknowledge abandoning proactive hunting in favor of day-to-day firefighting. The manufacturing industry in particular is feeling the pain, with 89% of CISOs saying that they are worried about missing real threats because of the sheer data volume. That's especially troubling since ransomware attacks against manufacturing surged to 218 last year, making it the second hardest hit critical sector after healthcare. The study's advice is to treat threat intelligence as a capability, and it's not just a fire hose of data. You have to prioritize actionable contextual analysis, because unless you're mapping intelligence to your real-world business risks, you're just adding more noise to the mix. And with cyber talent shortages showing no signs of waning, focusing your available expertise on what genuinely moves the risk needle has never been more important. And that's a wrap for this week's Cyber Bites. If you're an analyst, a developer, or just a cyber-curious listener, remember, staying one step ahead means updating not just your code, but your whole approach to risk. Catch you next time for more Cyber Bites. Until then, stay sharp and stay secure.